one thing that's really surprised me about learning about your journey and about your kids and everything that you've learned is that you landed on the dyes. Like I would have been a lot more suspect of other things. I think in the last few years, people at least have been made aware to some extent, probably not the masses, but some people that are looking for this information realize that there's a lot of crap in our foods and these dyes are not the best. But I find it interesting that it wasn't something that I would have suspected more than the dyes. It wasn't like sugar or wheat or any of those other things. Can you tell us a little bit more about that journey of like getting things out and learning that it was actually the dyes?
Yeah, well, okay, like I said, we were already a little bit I guess I was probably a little bit have you ever heard the term scrunchy?
I have
Like,
not.
kinda okay, so that's, like, kind of a new term. Like, I would say now I'm much more cautious about all things, but at that time, I was trying to have a balanced life where it's, like, mostly organic, but then, on the weekends, we go a little ham, which, I mean, we do still keep a balanced life, like but anyway, I say all that to say, like, we already like, the foods that he ate, like, he didn't even eat I was very careful to give him any sugars to begin with. Like, we started off with just vegetables so that he could, like, get a taste for vegetables, and now he's a very good eater. But anyway, we really weren't doing a whole lot of sugars and
Gotcha.
processed foods to begin with. So, I think that's where we were just kinda like, "Okay, we don't do sugar." Like, we don't do I mean, we did do some sugar, but we don't do a lot of sugar. It would just be like birthday parties. Of course, we wouldn't bring anything extra for birthday parties, whereas now we do have to bring like a dye-free swap. Um, but what I did was I searched foods that could impact behavior,
Well, and
and I came across
the reason that you did that to begin with is your food
oh,
allergies.
okay, yeah, so I guess I should rewind. I have several food allergies, and, I think that's likely a result of I spent about a year on antibiotics.
Oh,
And so my gut health and then also I likely had a gene that was turned I don't know. But anyway, I have several food allergies and they're big. So I'm allergic to wheat, dairy, yeast, eggs, and cashews. And so it's not an anaphylactic allergy, but it is a true allergy in that I went to an allergist and they tested me. It's not just a food sensitivity. And so like I have felt the power of eliminating foods that were creating harm and inflammation in my body and how much better I felt in my mind and everything. So I knew the power of food. And so I was searching foods that could impact behavior, expecting just to get or hoping just to get just a minor shift just to help us out a little bit. So I came across an article that suggested eliminating wheat, cow's milk, or dairy, wheat, dairy, and synthetic dyes. And so we did a complete elimination diet. And this was actually while we were on vacation. So we started on vacation, this elimination diet, and just reading labels. And within 48 hours, like our child was a different child. And
wow.
I guess to back up, before we did the elimination diet, he had bad days most days. Like he did a mother's morning out. So between like 9 and 11, 3 days a week, he was going to like daycare and we were getting several write ups. I was having to pick him up several times a week. I mean, it was tireless. And so we did the elimination diet. And we would occasionally before we did sorry, let me back up. Before we did the elimination diet, we would occasionally have days where he was just so good and so easy to reason with. And so like we weren't like super keen on giving him a diagnosis. So whenever we did the elimination diet, 48 hours, that child that we had on occasion that would just be really easy to reason with, we had that child for 30 days straight. Like
Wow.
he stopped hitting us. He might have hit us once that month. You could like reason with him when it was time to go or whenever we did something that was not what he wanted to do. It was like, okay, he could listen and we started to make progress with his behavior like really quickly and quite literally within 48 hours. And so after the 30-day elimination diet, I reintroduced wheat and it had no effect. Then I reintroduced dairy and it had no effect. And when I reintroduced synthetic dyes within 15 minutes, the behaviors that we were seeing all those years, they came flooding back. The hitting, the inability to cope, the just
Fits.
the fits, it just all came flooding back. And so like we knew that it was synthetic dyes just based off that. And so that is our story. Not every kid reacts that dramatically. Um, for most kids, it's just like a small shift in behavior or it creates aggression or sleeplessness. Um, But for our child, it was dramatic, and for a lot of kids, it is really dramatic. And so we always suggest at least starting with dyes. And what we've seen with a lot of families is they will eliminate synthetic dyes, and then that will help them get to like the baseline of where their child is, where God created their child to be, and then they can figure out, okay, maybe they have like ADHD or something like that, or maybe they have a sensitivity to another food, and then they eliminate that. And so it was helpful for us to go through the complete elimination. And so that's what we suggest with families is to completely eliminate it for 30 days, see the impact. If there is no behavioral impact, still feel really good about your eliminating something that's very toxic to us, something that can cause cancer, that can be genotoxic. So even though there may not be a behavioral issue, we always suggest like eliminating synthetic dyes either way.
Well, and also we saw, as the group grew, we saw that we thought originally that our story was going to be pretty rare. We thought Atreyu was probably a rare case, but then the more we heard, it's the more stories similar to ours, and kids having even worse reactions to dyes. And I think what really inspired Whitney to like really want to do this is the fact that you sit down and think about, okay, if we would not have figured this out, like what would the trajectory of his life have been? Like he was having trouble making friends. He was having trouble like with teachers. Like, it's a lot of times your kid can have problems in their daycare or their school. But when your kid is the behavior kid
Big
in the
kid.
class, like it's dramatic, not only for them, it's dramatic for the family. And
Well, we even had one teacher, and this is painful. We had one teacher, and we've never said this on a podcast, that told us that, and our child is very smart, and everybody thinks their kid's smart, obviously. But she said in her 20 years of teaching, he is the smartest kid she's ever taught, but he is
Wow.
in the top 3 worst kids she's ever taught.
Oh my
She said
goodness.
that
this was at 3 years
at
old.
3 years old. And she also said in that same meeting that he didn't have friends. And at this point, they were putting in a lot of manpower to try to help him. And I do understand that. But like, and it makes sense. You have a kid that keeps hurting you at school. You would tell your child to give them some space until they figure out how to be a good friend. We've had that conversation.